There's a stretch of a few minutes in the 2008 movie Speed Racer that I think about a lot, that I think totally captures just how wild and unconventional this movie really is. It comes about 45 minutes in, when Speed, last name Racer, yes, that is the main character's name, meets with Arnold Royalton Esquire, the head of a giant auto conglomerate, and turns down the offer to join his racing team. Royalton then launches into an epic Shakespearean monologue, revealing the sinister truth about the auto racing industry. That the entire thing, every single race, is actually rigged in order to manipulate stock prices. Everything Speed has believed his entire life is a lie. And as he says this, the background behind Royalton starts transforming, becoming the documentary news footage of the history that he's explaining. And then, right as Royalton has finished delivering this blistering line,
"All that matters is power and the unassailable might of money,"
the film suddenly cuts to another storyline happening concurrently. Speed's little brother Spritle and his monkey friend / maybe brother Chim Chim, this is a very normal movie, on a deranged sugar-fueled candy bender running amok through the Royalton car factory while the guitar solo from Freebird plays. And then the film cuts back to Royalton and Speed and the talk about greed and corruption in car racing. And here we get one of the most insane scene transitions in cinema history. And yes, that includes the one from The Lost World and the one from House of Gucci. Royalton starts to explain to Speed the disasters that will soon befall him and his family for daring to turn against him. As the camera dollies around Royalton, the background begins to move faster than the camera is moving, picking up more and more speed until it turns into full anime speed lines. And as Royalton is still talking, on the other side of the frame, Speed from several days in the future, in the race Royalton is describing, slides onto the screen until he is front and center in a close-up. And now we are fully in the race, several days in the future, but the shot is still going. The camera now pulls back impossibly fast through the race course, revealing Speed driving through 4 corkscrew turns. We are fully in cartoon world now, and it keeps pulling back through a screen, revealing that we're looking at a blimp overlooking the racetrack on an island next to a volcano. And so let me just restate what just happened. We had a serious scene revealing the film's anti-capitalist themes, intercut with wacky monkey antics set to a Leonard Skinner needle drop, and then in a single shot, we transitioned from a CEO's office to a car race happening in the future that ends up thousands of feet in the air overlooking a blimp and a volcano. Back in 2008, audiences simply were not ready for where Lana and Lily Wachowski wanted to take them in jet-powered supercars. This film arrived sandwiched between the first Iron Man and The Dark Knight, a true sign of where popular American cinema was at the time and where it would be for the next decade or so. Speed Racer was roundly rejected by audiences and critics alike, earning a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes and losing Warner Brothers a reported $100 million. But it's 2025 now. Both cinema and audience tastes are in very different places than they were back then. And in these last 17 years, Speed Racer, like a hidden treasure on Antiques Roadshow, has been reappraised. These days, saying Speed Racer is secretly great doesn't earn you quite as many weird, derisive looks as it used to. And as someone who was there in the theater on opening night in 2008 and knew right from the start just how special this movie is, it's like the entire last 17 years of my life have been leading to this moment. So folks, let's rev that Bernoulli Converginator, because it's time to go.
Go, Speed, go!
Hello, I'm Patrick Willems, and welcome back to a long-awaited episode of the show. First off though, a big thank you to Rowing Blazers for providing my wardrobe for this episode. A big fan of what those guys do, and this Paddington sweater is, I think, clearly one of the best things I have ever owned. I still can't believe that we've gotten multiple sweater sponsors already this year. 2025, bad year for America, pretty good year for me, if you base that entirely on how many free sweaters I've received. Oh, and speaking of sweaters, we've got a big new drop on AuthenticYouTubeProps.com, a real site. Now you can own actual sweaters that I have worn in videos over the years. Not this one, but other sweaters. So feel free to buy them, wear them, hang them on your wall, I don't know, press them into your face and inhale deeply, put them on an effigy of me to burn so I'll bless your coming harvest. Once it's out of my hands, it's all yours. Do whatever you want with them. Just please help me clean out my closet and in the process, make a bit of money so I can pay Emma. Speaking of which, Emma's back. Hey Emma.
Hi Patrick.
Welcome back to the studio. So did you finish your Kilm Studies thesis?
Traveler searching for purity, mimesis, and desire in Val Kilmer's The Saint?
Yeah, that one.
That was just my first year thesis. My new thesis is the soteriological ontologies of Batman Forever.
Like I always say, the 9th best Batman is the #1 for academic studies. But anyway, the reason we're here today, Speed Racer.
Patrick, you can do better than just explain Speed Racer and why it's great. We need to raise the stakes.
Nobbles, don't interrupt. It makes me and the audience hate you.
Just doing my job as your producer. You need a catchier thesis, a hotter take, something hyperbolic to draw people in and glue their butts to their ergonomic chairs.
So what, you want me to make some crazy claim like, I don't know, Speed Racer is the most important movie of the 21st century?
Yes, perfect!
Wait, so we're just committing to that?
And to prove it, you'll have to beat the top 10 competitors.
Wait, where did this list even come from? And how did you have it ready to go so quickly?
It doesn't matter. Much like your own bombastic claims, my lists come from dubious and subjective origins. On your mark, get set, go!
All right, so if we are going to prove that Speed Racer is the most important movie of the 21st century, something that honestly kind of seems impossible to prove, well, I guess the first thing we need is some context. So let's do a quick history lesson. As we all know, in 1999, The Matrix, the second film by the Wachowskis, fundamentally changed cinema forever. There is a pre-Matrix era and a post-Matrix era. The easiest way to determine which one you're in is asking, how does Keanu say whoa? Whoa. Whoa. And then in 2003, in one of the most anticipated movie events of all time, the Wachowskis released 2 Matrix sequels. These sequels ended up being greeted with a wildly mixed reception. But regardless, The Matrix was already an iconic cinematic classic, and everyone wondered, after 5+ years immersed in Matrix world, what would the Wachowskis do next? After a brief detour writing and producing the film adaptation of V for Vendetta, the follow-up finally came. Now, the revolutionary filmmakers who gave us the ultra-slick orgy of kung fu, hard sci-fi, and bullet time wrapped in slick black leather would be adapting Speed Racer, one of the most famous and iconic anime shows of all time. We could only speculate, how cool and badass was this thing going to be?
Hey, what are you two doing? Nothing.
It turned out the Wachowskis had decided to make what is proudly a kids movie, leaving the WB marketing department in a very confusing place of simultaneously trying to sell it to Matrix fans and Spy Kids fans. On May 9th, 2008, Speed Racer opened at a disappointing number 3 at the American box office. Number 1 was, of course, Iron Man in its second weekend, and number 2 was the Cameron Diaz-Ashton Kutcher romantic comedy, What Happens in Vegas. A movie that proves that what happens in Vegas does indeed stay in What Happens in Vegas. Because in the last 17 years, not a single person has ever spoken about that movie. And yet, it still more than doubled Speed Racer's total box office. Speed Racer ended up earning less than half of what it cost to produce and market. Critics mostly hated it. Anthony Lane of The New Yorker called it pop fascism. Scott Tobias of the AV Club said it's, quote, much of the time unwatchable. And I don't agree, but I kinda get it. Because, in the words of Marty McFly,
I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet.
Well, Nobbles, we are off and running, and what an opening segment.
That's right, Emma. Patrick really came out verbally swinging, but will he be able to keep this pace up?
Stick with us as we bring you commentary on all the pulse-pounding action.
guys, really? Do you really have to do commentary on a video essay? Like, technically, this is already commentary. And it's weird that you're doing this like 10 feet away from me.
Patrick seems a little distracted. Do you think this will affect the essay's performance?
Only time will tell, Emma.
Okay, so anyway, the first thing that we have to address is the aesthetic of Speed Racer, because it is insane and aggressive, and the visual language is completely unlike anything that had ever been done in live-action movies. The second that most adults saw this thing, they recoiled in horror. Now, this was obviously not the first all-green screen movie. Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones, got that ball rolling back in 2002, and obviously, to this day, plenty of superhero movies are almost entirely shot on green and blue screens. In all of these cases, though, all of the visual effects are in pursuit of realism. Even when it fails and doesn't look good, usually due to overworked and underpaid VFX artists being given impossible deadlines, it's trying to look photorealistic. In the few years before Speed Racer, Sin City and 300 had gone for a more stylized look, but the goal there was to slavishly recreate the static panels of Frank Miller graphic novels. What Speed Racer did differently was realize, hey, if we're going to be making more than half the movie with visual effects anyway, and it's already based on such an over-the-top cartoon, then what the hell is the point of doing anything realistically? Why not completely embrace artifice and cartoon logic? Why not use this as an opportunity to completely reinvent cinematic language? In a conversation at DePaul University in 2014, Lana Wachowski said, "While we were going through production of The Matrix Revolutions, I just kept saying, like, God, I'm just so sick of how all these movies look the same. And at this point, all the other people are like imitating us, and we were trapped in this house of mirrors where you go to the movies and you're like, oh my God, that's our shot." So by the end of the process of making the whole Matrix trilogy, the two filmmakers were eager to break out of the aesthetic box they built and do something radical. So they did. A typical average shot in Speed Racer looks something like this. Now you look at that and right away you realize something is weird here. And then it clicks. There's no depth of field. As in, the way lenses work, there is a focal point, a distance from the lens that is in focus. So like here, me in this shot, I am in focus. But like these objects here on the desk are out of focus. The wall behind me is out of focus. But in this Speed Racer shot, everything, the foreground and the background, is in perfectly sharp focus in a way that is basically impossible with any existing lenses. This was one of the first films shot digitally on what is now a fairly primitive camera, the Sony Cine Alta F23, which only shoots in HD, not even 4K. Visual effects supervisor John Gaeta said, "The Sony had greater depth of field, which is not necessarily cinematic when you're trying to compose close-up shots. But we didn't want the texture of the movie to be like film. We wanted a different feel." I remember talking to someone from another company who said, "But we haven't met anyone who didn't want the cinematic depth of field quality." In other words, the footage didn't look like a regular movie, but the Wachowskis didn't care. They didn't want this to look like any live-action film that had been made before, and traditional cinematic depth of field was not a concern. And the way they achieved this look was not just through using these new digital cameras, it was by shooting all of these shots in layers. So each part was shot separately in focus and then composited together to get this infinite focus, even in simple locations like a classroom or a kitchen. In simplest terms, this is making a live-action film look like animation, in which everything is equally in focus and you can see it all clearly. But the reason movies have depth of field isn't because that's a rule that movies need to be that way. After all, Orson Welles was trying to change that back in 1941. It's simply because that's how lenses physically work. The Wachowskis looked at this as a limitation that could be transcended. But also, suddenly, depth of field became a new storytelling tool with which to play. So in this flashback sequence, when Speed sees Trixie for the first time, in this shot, the bokeh, which is the blurred out-of-focus artifacts in an image, morph into hearts. And then when she sees he's about to crash and shouts, the background bokeh snaps back into full focus. Or here, to emphasize Speed's frustration, the background starts out looking normal, but then the focus shifts completely while stretching out vertically. Or in this shot, Royalton starts out of focus in the background, but instead of a traditional rack focus, he snaps into equal focus with the foreground as these two men agree to a deal. In his book, In the Blink of an Eye, Walter Murch describes a cut in a movie as functioning like the eye blinking, a split-second transition between images we're seeing. And often while watching a film, we will naturally blink on the cuts. Speed Racer does not work like this. Throughout the film, but especially in the racing scenes, Speed Racer constantly avoids traditional cuts, keeping our eyes glued wide open to what's happening on screen, refusing to let us blink. It's a similar effect as in a long take or oneer in a film, but here it's achieved very differently. It hurts your eyes a little bit, but if you're paying attention, it's worth it. No pain, no gain, as they say. In an extremely negative review from the time, Kyle Smith of the New York Post wrote, "Not to whine, but by the end, my eyeballs were on fire."
Eyeballs on fire? Cool beans.
So here's an example of what I'm talking about. This 1-minute dialogue scene only has one traditional cut. There are multiple shots in it, but they're assembled in a sort of visual collage, as close-ups of the characters wipe across the frame, blending one image into another, so the entire scene feels like one continuous motion. Even when people are standing still, the film keeps moving. Another shot will start as a simple static shot of racing commentators talking, and then pull backwards, revealing that what we were watching was a screen on a blimp, and then it will fly across miles and miles of track with everything in crystal clear focus, showing the cars driving through different sections of the course, essentially an entire montage in a shot that lasts about 20 seconds. This was possible because the VFX team, led by John Gaeta and Danny Glass, started work long before the film actually began shooting, and they worked alongside the production so every team could collaborate closely. They would create these 360-degree bubbles of each location and stack them on top of each other with a virtual camera moving through them, which is how they created insane shots like this. There will be a flashback as a team of racers are bribed, and as their eyes turn into dollar signs, then in the present, cars appear at the bottom of the frame as the men become the horizon, and then another car wipes across the frame, completing the transition and returning us fully to the later scene. Later in the film, at least 6 different shots appear on screen at the same time as a collage of every character in the film wipes across the screen. It is a lot, but the Wachowskis trust that we can process multiple images at the same time, and seeing all of these images of different characters creates mental links between them.
Patrick is doing a great job of describing the visual language of the movie, but do you think he'll mention the best part?
The cars using beehive catapults?
Exactly!
Throughout Speed Racer, cameras fly through screens, action occurs in focus in the foreground, midground, and background simultaneously, but wait. Okay, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. This all seems insane and overwhelming right now, but the thing is, the movie doesn't throw all of this at you at once. It doesn't start, to use a racing analogy, in 5th gear. It starts in, like, 2nd. It eases you in and steadily teaches you how to watch it during the 15-minute opening sequence, which I would say is maybe the greatest opening of any movie this century. Now, I know we all love the opening scenes of The Social Network or The Dark Knight or Inglourious Bastards or Up, and I mean, you can make a whole video just about, like, great opening scenes in movies, and nope, Patrick, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna get distracted. That's for another day. Those scenes are great, but what Speed Racer is doing is simply on another level.
That was a close one. Patrick almost got pulled into a different essay topic at the end.
Truly death-defying stuff. Let's see that again in super slow-mo! You and the audience may have paid for the whole seat, but you're only gonna need the edge.
Nobbles, this is YouTube. They didn't pay for anything.
Unless they're watching it on Nebula, and you can get 40% off an annual subscription.
Guys, save the ad read for the end, okay? Okay? Anyway. I think most of us can agree that Lana and Lily Wachowski know how to open a movie. We've all seen The Matrix, we all know it has one of the most iconic and memorable openings of all time, and say what you will about Reloaded, but any movie that puts a scorpion kick in the first 2 minutes knows what it's doing. But Speed Racer tops both of those. The opening sequence of Speed Racer establishes 8 years of backstory and relationships between 7 different characters, what would normally be the entire first half of a movie, in just 15 minutes, all intercut with one of the most incredible racing scenes in film history. In this sequence, there are 18 jumps in time. The camera is moving about 200 miles per hour, and the color saturation is cranked up to frankly dangerous levels. And somehow, instead of being confusing or painful, it is exhilarating and emotional. So we have to start right at the very beginning with the opening studio logos for Warner Brothers, Village Roadshow, and Silver Pictures. They appear as a kaleidoscope, full of first primary colors, then secondary colors, prepping us for the dizzying visual overload to come. And from here, for a movie known for being a crazy all green screen production, it starts surprisingly simply, on a fully practical set with Speed in a locker room getting dressed for a race. And then, only 2 shots into the movie, we have our first jump in time, done with a match cut, which we'll see a more evolved version of in a few minutes. Here, 8 years earlier, young Speed is in school taking a test, but he can't concentrate. He's turning his test booklet into an animated flip book. He's imagining the questions changing so that they're about cars. The movie doesn't say it explicitly, but what's very clear here is that this kid has ADHD. And if it's not clear enough, we then cut to his teacher in a meeting with his mom discussing his trouble concentrating in class. I don't know why people were so baffled by this movie when it just lays it out right there. If you just accept this is all from the perspective of a kid with ADHD, it makes perfect sense.
Nobbles, you look like the imaginary friend of a kid with ADHD.
Aw, thanks, Emma.
And from here, we get our first taste of the candy-coated, stylized visuals that will fill the rest of the movie. The scene stretches out into infinity as we fully enter Speed's perspective as it turns into a fantasy sequence, with him imagining being in a race, with lo-fi animation that looks like a child's crayon drawings, a preview of the fusion of live action and animation that we're going to see very soon. In these opening few minutes, the movie introduces the elements of its visual style and language one by one to get us accustomed to them. First, there's the hypersaturated colors, then the time jumps, then the infinite depth of field, first seen in this shot, and here we get the insane cartoon aesthetic of this world. Look, this is one of my favorite movies, and I will totally acknowledge that this might be the ugliest shot in the whole thing. But it's important, because this shot is telling the audience, hey, this is the world of the movie, it is a cartoon, and yes, it will look this insane all the time, so you better get used to it.
Do you think Speed Racer was an influence on Megalopolis?
Well, I bet Francis is a huge fan of Chim Chim.
In the next scene, when the film shifts over to the racetrack, suddenly it is in constant motion, with the camera flying behind the car and across the track, totally untethered from any physical restrictions. We get another time jump back to the present, with Speed in his locker room, priming us for the time jumps that are about to get a whole lot faster. And then we get this shot, where time slows down, Rex's car begins to fade out, and instead of a regular match cut like we had earlier, the shot warps time, melting together the same angle as we jump straight into a race 8 years later, with Speed now grown up and driving himself. And now that the movie has trained us to understand its surreal color palette, the cartoon world, the jumps in time, the speed of the driving scenes, and Speed's point of view, it now combines all of these into one overwhelming racing scene where immediately a barrage of cars fly straight at us into the camera in a shot that feels more 3D than most 3D movies. If this movie had actually been released in 3D, it probably would have killed people. Many critics at the time, like New York Magazine's David Edelstein, called the racing scenes, quote, incoherent and disorienting. And not to be rude, but Mr. Edelstein, quite frankly, did not know what the fuck he was talking about. To call this incoherent when it was released at the height of the quick-cut shaky cam era is quite simply bad, lazy criticism. A refusal to even engage with or try to understand what you're watching.
Somebody better get New York Magazine's David Edelstein some aloe, because he just got burned.
What the Wachowskis are doing here is basically the Spielberg technique of combining multiple shots into one, but doing it way, way, way more aggressively. So a shot in this scene goes something like this. A wide shot tracking the cars cranes up through a tiny hole in the metal track and pans with the cars as they drive by, then flies up into the crowd. Or a wide aerial shot flies down into a medium tracking shot of the Mach 5 and then flies in closer into a close-up of Speed driving the car. Or check this one out. Here we get 4 whip pans between commentators each delivering a line, then a 5th whip pan into a profile close-up of Speed, then it pulls back into a wide shot tracking his car, then it flies across the entire track in less than a second into a deep focus close-up of Sparky, the team's mechanic. Unlike every other action movie of the time, Speed Racer actually holds shots for often 10 to 20 seconds. You can see exactly where everything is with clear geography. It's just that it's all moving so fast with such bright colors and super deep focus that it can be a little bit overwhelming. This entire opening 15-minute sequence is about introducing Speed and his family and the world of the movie, but it's mostly focused on Speed's relationship with his older brother Rex, who he idolizes. The movie introduces another wild technique here at the start of the race. When Sparky asks Speed, "You know who you're racing?" we cut to a shot that is Speed's POV, and on the track ahead of him, we see a ghostly car and realize it's Rex's car. Speed is literally racing against his brother's legacy on the same track, years apart. We follow Rex's ghost car, and again, mid-shot, we warp back in time 8 years to when Rex was racing on this same track. And from here, we ping-pong back and forth through time, telling the story of Rex's fall from grace, his falling out with their father, and his tragic death in a dangerous race. A shot will have Speed and the ghostly image of Rex slide together and transition into a flashback about Rex leaving home when Speed was a kid. Most flashbacks transition with a close-up of a character in the present wiping across the screen, so we see past and present together in the same frame, establishing the emotional links between the characters now and the events of the past. Who needs the Kuleshov effect, where we would see a flashback and then cut to Susan Sarandon in the present and assume she's thinking about that, when she can simply slide into the frame and we can see all of these images together. Characters and shots are sliding back and forth constantly like a pair of screen-size windshield wipers. Interestingly, the only safety feature the Mach 5 doesn't have. A rare overlook by Sparky, so thank God Speed never had to race in a light drizzle. At the end of the race, Speed wins, but he eases off the gas at the very end to let his brother's track record stay intact. And now, the movie's mission statement has been delivered. We know the family's entire history, even how Speed met his girlfriend Trixie. We know the tragedy that hangs over all of them. We know the legacy Speed is grappling with, and we understand the language of this movie. Heightened melodrama, zany comedy, total sincerity, delivered via the most blisteringly fast and colorful filmmaking that mainstream cinema has ever seen. Huge emotional storytelling linked with overwhelming visual momentum. There is, quite simply, nothing else like it. I love this movie.
What a recap of the opening! It's like I was there in the theater watching the first 15 minutes of Speed Racer.
I just wish he'd mentioned Snake Oiler. I loved his snake-looking car. I just wonder, why does it look like that?
The Wachowskis have always been ahead of their time. The Matrix was one of the most influential movies of all time, instantly transforming action movies and science fiction movies and costume design, as well as creating visual effects technology that would soon become standard throughout the industry. And then after the Matrix trilogy, it's like they could see the Matrix code and seems to understand the way the industry was going to shift. Steadily over the last 25 years, Hollywood has become increasingly risk-averse and ruled by the idea of IP. Original ideas, or OIs as I call them, which once made up the majority of films and TV shows produced in the US, have become exceedingly rare, with studio executives at the mercy of shareholders trying to stick to a reliable, safe formula of making movies based on existing brands and properties which come with what is known in the biz as pre-awareness. These are theoretically a safer bet than rolling the dice on something audiences are unfamiliar with. And the irony of all this is that these days, something like The Matrix would never get greenlit. This is why all of our biggest movies now are franchise sequels, are based on comic books, video games, book series, or just older movies. TV is filled with reboots of classic shows, such as the 2021 Peacock reboot of Alf. And fun fact, that show doesn't exist. That was a joke, I just made that up. But for a second, you believed me, and were like, whoa, did I already forget that Alf came back? And the problem is how totally plausible that is.
Nobbles, has anyone ever told you you would make a great Alf if they rebooted it?
Yes, but to be honest, I'm holding out for the Mork and Mindy reboot.
Even when something has never been commercially successful, studios will keep returning to that property and making new ones because any existing property, even an unpopular one, is preferable to taking a chance on an unproven new idea. Like, it's one of my favorite movies, but Blade Runner was never a hit. And 35 years later, it got a sequel that was also not a hit. And yet, right now, there is a Blade Runner TV show in production because despite its commercial track record, I guess it's still a thing people have heard of, and that's enough. So the Wachowskis seemed to see this coming. so they decided to lean into it. They decided that if they wanted to deliver radical ideas and filmmaking techniques, the best way was to Trojan horse it, to package those ideas inside something that seemed safe. A shiny, family-friendly blockbuster adapted from a beloved cartoon that, like Racer X, was secretly more than it seemed. Secretly, an anti-capitalist story about artistic struggles with the most aggressive visual style ever seen in a movie of this scale. In a 2012 interview, Lana Wachowski said, "Adults, they reject change, and an aesthetic change is too aggressive a death for them. Every generation experiences aesthetic death, and when you really assault an aesthetic, people freak out. But we said that kids are okay with aesthetic change."
And he sticks the landing with a direct quote from the filmmaker. That's just classic video essaying. Patrick is really showing us why he belongs behind that desk.
It's all about fundamentals, Emma. That's why this kid can video essay with the best of them.
Guys, I can still hear you both, and this is really distracting. But also that was genuinely very nice, so thank you. But anyway, the issue here is just that they picked Speed Racer to do this with. Because other than like a handful of weird Gen Xers, there are not a lot of hardcore Speed Racer fans. The show hadn't aired on TV in like decades, and so in 2008 it meant nothing to kids. It's something that people are aware of generally via cultural osmosis, but no one really cares that much about it. Most of my knowledge of it comes from the Dexter's Laboratory episode parodying it. But here at the Patrick H. Willems channel, we do our research. And so, I opened up Tubi and watched a bunch of Speed Racer episodes. For everything bizarre about the movie, Speed Racer is actually exactly the kind of faithful adaptation fans are always claiming they want when it comes to comic books or video games or books or cartoons. Like, it perfectly captures the imagery and iconography and tone of the source material while also elevating it with the tools of a new medium and infusing it with a unique personal vision. It's actually crazy how much of the movie is directly pulled from the show. Obviously, the designs of all the characters and cars, but also things like the following: Spritle and Chim Chim hiding in the trunk of the Mach 5, Trixie in her helicopter, all of the subplots with evil car company CEOs, even the buttons on the steering wheel of the Mach 5 and the specific gadgets they operate, images like the Mach 5 driving down a rocky mountain, the way the drivers pull over mid-race to have a showdown with gun-wielding bad guys, and just the general wild combinations of tones. The ultra-dramatic melodrama, the absurd action cartoon stuff, the silly kids comedy.
You know who was also in the original show? Snake Oiler. Wait, Snake Oiler? That's why his car looked like that. Snakes are famously oily.
Now, I would hesitate to call the Speed Racer cartoon a good show, but there is something pretty compelling about it. The imagery, even with the stiff, cheap animation, is really striking. The writing is stilted, but in the English dub at least, where it's all delivered with such energy where no one speaks with punctuation marks, it does kinda work. Now, the movie doesn't adapt those flaws, but rather it feels like what it's like to be a kid and watch the cartoon.
Cool beans.
And this is where Speed Racer surpasses every other attempt at making a live-action adaptation of an animated show. The others all lose visual energy by being forced to deal with the physical limitations of live action. Like, while it's a comic strip adaptation, not a cartoon, Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy film is a visual marvel, one of the best-looking movies ever made. But the choice to make it look like comic book panels and have no camera movement makes it frustratingly stiff at times. But Speed Racer takes the best from both worlds. It borrows the energy and techniques from anime, like using planes of shifting 2D images to create motion, but it adds advanced visual effects techniques so there is speed and fluidity as well as an incredibly active camera that the show was never capable of. And by having live-action performers, there is a shockingly real and subtle level of emotion to these scenes that only someone like John Goodman can deliver. Everyone is fully locked in and giving completely sincere performances. Like, just listen to how Emil Hirsch says something as patently absurd as Inspector Detector suspected foul play.
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 It's just fun to say. Oh, that rhymed.
Now, to borrow a move from Speed Racer, let's jump back in time to the opening moments of the film, when Speed is sitting in the classroom. What's more important than his undiagnosed ADHD, the other thing the film is establishing here, is that Speed is an artist. He has drawings all over his sneakers, he's creating an animated film in his test booklet, his fantasy of driving a race car is all done with hand-drawn animation. So if it's not obvious enough, here's Royalton literally saying it.
I knew at once this was no mere driver I was watching. This was an artist.
And also, here's Speed's mom saying it.
When I watch you do some of the things you do, I feel like I'm watching someone paint or make music. I go to the races to watch you make art.
Look, it's a movie about a guy who drives really fast whose name is Speed Racer. It's not interested in subtlety.
Speed Racer, slow down!
See, this is really a story of a prodigious artistic talent. And beyond that, it's a big metaphor for the film industry and an artist's struggle to work in that world. Like, the opening race at Thunderhead is basically Speed's indie breakout, the one that makes the mainstream industry sit up and take notice. And so, this is where the big studios come in and try to lock a filmmaker down to a contract and get them to make a franchise movie. And in the film, it's where Royalton comes in and tries to sign Speed to his company. Now, in the film industry, we have seen this happen over and over again in the last couple decades. A filmmaker makes a small movie that gets attention, and then next thing you know, they're making Spider-Man, or Twisters, or Jurassic World, or Eternals. Once upon a time, Jon Favreau was the guy who wrote Swingers, and now he exclusively makes giant-budget Disney franchise movies. So anyway, Royalton wants to control Speed. He wants to make him a cog in the machine. And so, Speed becomes disillusioned. This is the art that he loves, that he's been obsessed with his whole life, and he learns that the only thing anyone here cares about is using him to boost stock prices for giant conglomerates. No one cares about pure racing. His brother Rex had tried to resist this system, and it destroyed him. The great question this movie poses is it possible to make personal art in a system that only wants to commodify it, that sees you as nothing more than a tool for profit? And so now we need to talk a bit about Lana and Lily Wachowski. They will probably always be best known for The Matrix, and associated with ultra-slick, kick-ass movies where people wearing black leather shoot each other in the head in slow motion. But the truth is, the Wachowskis have, from the very beginning, been big, open-hearted softies. Their very first movie, the stylish neo-noir crime thriller Bound, spoiler alert, ends with two queer women falling in love, defeating the bad guy, and driving off together hand in hand. Everything they've ever made has been optimistic. They believe in change and progress. They believe that we can create a better world. Which brings us now to the final lap of the Grand Prix.
We're heading into the home stretch, folks, and there is still so much to talk about.
I know! Patrick hasn't even mentioned K-pop star Rain, Richard Roundtree, or the fact that a live-action monkey wears human-themed pajamas!
He also hasn't mentioned my favorite part of the film, the score.
Or when the snow in the air turns into speed lines when the camera moves.
Or the light trails from the cars, like in Akira.
Guys, please stop pointing out all of the things that I missed.
Don't worry, Nobbles, I'm sure these omissions won't haunt him.
They will. If the opening 15 minutes is the most extraordinary start to a movie this century, then the climax of Speed Racer, I'm gonna say, is the most transcendent, overwhelmingly powerful sequence anyone has ever made. Hyperbolic? Yes. But this whole episode is about hyperbole, so I'm just gonna go with it.
He's beginning to believe.
So we start with Speed in his use the Force Luke moment, or his Neo seeing the Matrix code moment, or whatever you want to call it. But basically, this is when he clears his mind and restarts the Mach 6, and then we're off. Now he is finally free of everything that has troubled him throughout the film. He's no longer haunted by the legacy of Rex, and no longer racing his ghost. He has exposed the corruption of the CEOs. He has no rivals to beat. Now, Speed is finally ready to paint his masterpiece. Up in the crowd, Spritel stands up and, mirroring the opening when he asks,
What if he doesn't?
Now he confidently states, he's gonna do it. This sequence is pure artistic emotional catharsis. Here we see seemingly every moment of Speed's life happening simultaneously. Every relationship he's had, his family, his collaborators, every experience he's lived through has made him who he is and brought him to this point. Simultaneously, he is 10 years old, fantasizing about racing, and he is a grown-up racing in the Grand Prix. In the story of the film, as we're watching Speed do something that's never been done before, the movie itself is transforming, showing us things we've never seen before. Speed is melting and warping the reality of the film in the most abstract imagery ever put into a blockbuster franchise movie. The visuals are entirely subjective, expressing Speed's moment of emotional and artistic transcendence. As the choirs kick in the best score Michael Giacchino has ever written, and the finish line approaches, Speed flies into a tunnel of light as the checkered flag wraps around him. And now, like so many Wachowski protagonists, he is reborn. Not to be crude, because this is a PG-rated family film, but I have to say, this is maybe the most orgasmic climax to a movie ever made that does not involve a literal sex scene. I mean, just look at him.
Patrick comes racing through the recap of the final lap with style.
But he forgot to mention the zebra zoetrope along the side of the track. That's gonna cost him points with the judges.
I don't remember what that is.
And so, Speed does it. He defies the corporations that tried to control him. He creates a deeply personal work of art, and he wins. He achieves the greatest mainstream success possible. And the dream of the Wachowskis was that this movie, Speed Racer, could be their final lap of the Grand Prix. They had a perfect plan. Take a PG-rated family movie and a beloved IP, make a major summer blockbuster, and use that to smuggle in true art. A singular vision that was wildly experimental and pushed the medium forward. A lightning strike that showed what mainstream cinema could be. And it didn't happen. The beautiful, noble tragedy of Speed Racer was that the Wachowskis believed in a better world. They have for their whole careers. They've been saying it in their movies over and over again.
A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
I believe there is another world waiting for us, Sixsmith. A better world. And I'll be waiting for you there.
We were on our way to remake your world.
Change a few things.
Speed Racer wanted to remake the world of cinema, to show us what was possible. But we weren't ready. Now, you could criticize the anti-corporate message of the movie by saying, well, this is still a movie funded and released by a major Hollywood studio, but the movie itself is very much aware of how the system works, and that to operate on the highest level, you do need money. As Speed puts it early on,
you gotta win if you want to keep driving, and that's what I want to do.
in other words, you need to make hit movies if you want to keep making movies. And unlike Speed Racer the character, Speed Racer the movie did not win. The Wachowskis' blank check at Warner Brothers ran out, and so for their next film, the wildly ambitious Cloud Atlas, they had to independently finance it with many international backers, which is actually not that dissimilar to how Speed Racer is able to compete in the movie. Now, there's an ongoing trend on this channel where we often return to stories of wild, ambitious movies that were commercial failures and did not have the impact on film culture that I think they should have. Like Streets of Fire are several films by Francis Ford Coppola. I seem to be obsessed with cinematic death and failure, and to be fair, those are two words that get a lot more clicks on YouTube. And yes, I think the world would be a better place if Speed Racer had been a hit. I mean, I'm not saying like the pandemic would never have happened, but maybe. I mean, as Ashton Kutcher taught us, the butterfly effect is very hard to predict. But finally, culture is beginning to catch up. A few years ago, critic Scott Tobias, who I quoted earlier when, back in 2008, he'd called Speed Racer unwatchable, wrote an article revisiting it and admitting that he had been wrong. Was I wrong? Yes. But that's the thing about cutting-edge work. Not everyone is ready for the future, even if they suspect they're seeing it. Over time, Speed Racer has no longer seemed like a big, indigestible lump, because my metabolism for processing images has changed, and its hummingbird flutter of montages, superimpositions, and visual effects is more legible. 13 years later, the film still stabs the eyeballs like a serial murderer, with its pixie stick energy and a color scheme that deliberately clashes, as if a prankster swapped paint cans on Pedro Almodovar's production designer. Preparing to revisit Speed Racer, I feared those 135 minutes might again prove completely enervating. But the Wachowskis are not merely throwing images at the wall here. Once you adjust to the film's pace, it's easier to appreciate its craft. Speed Racer was released at the height of gritty, grounded adaptations that were embarrassed of their silly source material.
Don't ever do that again.
But now, look at the trailer for the upcoming Superman movie, which is full of bright colors and ridiculous costumes. Like, it's got a superpowered dog wearing a cape, but there is no irony and no winking. It is totally sincere. The biggest blockbusters in the summer of 2008 both happened to be about heroic billionaires who owned giant multinational conglomerates, while in Speed Racer, the billionaire CEO is the villain. Now, I would say our cultural attitude towards billionaires has evolved a lot in the last 17 years, and here, I think it's Speed Racer that has aged the best.
Wow, and right in the final stretch, he vaguely ties in current politics.
I don't know. If you ask me, he could have gone a lot harder there.
Mad Max Fury Road, while not as aggressively stylized or experimental as Speed Racer, captured a similar level of deranged visual energy and went on to win Oscars and be widely considered one of the best movies of the century. And you can feel Speed Racer's influence in modern cult classic Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, or Best Picture Oscar winner Everything Everywhere All at Once. But oddly, the movie that I think it feels closest to is Barbie. It's another case of a great filmmaker being given huge creative freedom with an IP, making a commercial blockbuster with a very singular vision that is also wildly stylized, and yet this one was widely embraced, becoming the biggest movie of that year. They're not exactly the same, like Barbie is less experimental, it's generally more straightforward visually, and it's more of a pure comedy. And I also don't think it's as good as Speed Racer, but there, Greta Gerwig pulled off something similar to what the Wachowskis were aiming for, packaging real ideas and artistry into what seemed like a very safe and commercial IP adaptation. And you just have to look at the steady reclamation of Speed Racer over the past 17 years, as it has been embraced by a new, younger audience of cinephiles. It plays multiple times per year at repertory screenings here in New York to sold-out crowds. We're not quite there yet, but the world is finally starting to catch up to where Speed Racer was 17 years ago.
There we have it, folks. The checkered flag is down and Patrick has made his argument, but will it be enough?
Let's take a look at the leaderboard. A shocking upset. Even after this impassioned video, Speed Racer just can't top the #1 seed for most important film of the 21st century. The inimitable powerhouse of early DV cinema, made by the grandmother of the French New Wave herself, The Gleaners and I.
What a shame. Patrick came so far only to crash and stall out, but Agnes Varda is a demon behind the wheel.
That about does it for us, folks. For World Video Essaying, I've been
Okay,
Nobbles.
guys, that's enough. I'm sorry, but I've gotta cut you off. Like, it's fine if you want to do color commentary on this episode, even though I still think it's really weird to do commentary on a video essay, but like, why does this have to end with me losing? Like, why was this ever a competition in the first place? This is just some random list of movies that Nobbles came up with. There's no way to objectively evaluate this. Like, why do I have to beat some silly list to prove Speed Racer's importance? Really, what does something as vague as importance even mean when you're talking about movies? How is anyone supposed to argue that Speed Racer, or any other movie for that matter, is more or less important than Avatar, or Spirited Away, or Agnes Varda's documentary about people picking up potatoes? Like, I still vividly remember the day I first saw Speed Racer back in 2008 as a fresh-faced college undergrad.
Wow, that's racer.
The movie thrilled me, and it moved me, and it showed me so many things that I had never seen before in a film. I felt that way then, and still all these years later, after so many viewings, I still feel that way now. So who cares how quote-unquote important this movie actually is? All that really matters is that it's important to me.
Patrick, why are you a baby in that flashback?
Because I was 20, and 20 is basically a baby. So now, to prove how young and agile I still am, there's only one thing left to do. Jump over this desk like Speed Racer jumps out of the Mach 5. Here I go.
Go Speed Racer, go!
Okay, so this episode was kind of a long one, but maybe, I don't know, maybe for some reason you have not yet had enough. Maybe you saw that teaser for the next video, which is all about how movies have made people fly, like Superman or The Matrix or Peter Pan, and maybe you saw that and thought, but I want to watch it now. Well, good news. You can, because the episode is already finished, and it's out right now on Nebula. It will be on YouTube in like a few weeks, but why would you wait when you can watch it this very second? Nebula, as you might know by now, is the streaming service that I helped develop and am a part owner of, and that's where you'll be able to watch my new movie, The Dinner Plan, starring Griffin Newman, John Hodgman, and Zach Cherry when it premieres this year. I have tons of exclusive stuff, movies, bonus videos, a holiday special that are only available on Nebula, but maybe, most importantly, all of my videos premiere there weeks before they do on YouTube. And also, no ads. So, if you ask me, it just makes sense. If you use my code here, or click the link in the description, or scan this QR code, then you'll get 40% off of an entire year of Nebula, which comes out to only $3 a month. And a portion of that money goes directly to supporting me and this channel, which will help us make the videos even better. Okay, that is all for now. Thank you so much for watching, but I have to go put some ice on my knee because this hurts. Bye. Hey Emma, hey other Patrick. So look, I've noticed that the channel has been in a bit of a slump lately, most likely due to a lack of exciting hot takes from me. So thought I'd send in a video to help you out and give you a bit of a boost. So as I was lying here on the beach in beautiful Costa Rica, I was doing what I imagine most of us do in our spare time. Rewatching the 2009 Hugh Jackman Oscars intro. I'm not even really an Oscars guy, but that is an all-time classic. In that opening number, he sings about many of the biggest films of 2008, The Dark Knight and Iron Man, and beloved classics we still talk about to this day, like Frost Nixon and The Reader. But there's one film that was notably left out. Okay, maybe not notable to most people, but it is to me, because it might be the very best movie that was released that year. I'm talking, of course, about Speed Racer. A movie where the geniuses that are Lana and Lily Wachowski took over $100 million of Warner Brothers money to make something that looks like a 24-pack of Crayola crayons got vomited onto a movie screen. Complimentary. It's a story of a talented young car racer named Speed. racer who comes from the Racer family, an independent family-run business trying to compete against giant corporations. It is a deeply personal, moving story about the struggle to create personal art in a capitalist industry. A movie where John Goodman beats up a ninja, where a monkey named Chim Chim throws poop at a British gangster, and where race cars catapult beehives and snakes at each other. It's a movie in which simple concepts like physics and depth of field are thrown in the trash because they're old-fashioned and lame, where flashbacks happen within flashbacks. It's a movie that pushes traditional cinematic language so hard that it melts. It's a movie where every 5 minutes something happens that makes you say,
"Who beats?"
You see, this movie rules. It absolutely fucking rules, and today, we are gonna talk about why.
Here we are, filming ourselves.
I can't say much about Val Kilmer's life or death that he hasn't covered already. Part of the joy and the profound sadness of being a Val Kilmer fan in the sunset of his career was his dedication to artistic legacy and being understood. Val has always been easy to joke about, easy to reduce to buzzwords, but difficult to understand. In the end, it's not that complicated. He was a messy and talented human being with an incredible creative instinct. Successful actors have to give themselves over to the world to bring some kind of ephemeral truth to the film through their performance. The camera, the audience, the filmmaker, everyone except the performer owns that portion of their life which has been forever crystallized on screen. Val described acting, while paraphrasing Yeats and talking about Jim Morrison, like this. You see a tree, and you observe a truth about the tree, and you're hit with it, the magic of the tree. It's a spiritual thing, beyond the physical life form of the tree. So then you write and write and write about the form of the tree and the life of the tree and the spirit of it until your own personality is gone from the words. When you're gone from the poem, then it's a poem. Part of you disappears so that you can dance with the spirit of something else. Val was a character actor, but also a character maker. He took supporting roles and built them up until he was gone from them. More than playing characters, he stepped aside and they lived through his performances. After he lost his voice, Val took up painting, continued collaging, wrote a memoir, and helmed a documentary. In the weeks since he passed, I have returned to these artifacts of self-documentation, all of which engage unflinchingly with the reality that death, or however Val conceptualized death, would approach sooner rather than later. Now the end is here. And after years of dress rehearsal, after 1,000 ego deaths and artistic rebirths, it's time to say goodbye to the artist I admire and owe so much to. But I'm not ready to say goodbye to the work, and I hope that any of you who are watching this little tribute will take the time to partake in a kiln to keep the art alive for a while longer. Some kiln suggestions, because there are more than 80 to choose from, and they are not all good or worth watching. The documentary Val from 2021, Real Genius, 1985, Tombstone, 1993, The Doors, 1991, Columbus Day, 2008, and Heat, 1995.
Bye. About to go on stage. Val's just about to make his entry.